Have you ever been batting well, really well, seeing the ball clearly, timing it nicely, feeling like the game has slowed down a little, and then suddenly you play a rash shot and immediately think, why did I do that? It's because something in your head switched for that split second. You lost focus. And the frustrating part is that it often feels like it came out of nowhere. One ball, you're completely in control of the innings, and the next, you're walking back to the pavilion, scratching your head, wondering how you managed to get out when everything had just felt fine moments before. If you've ever experienced that, you're not alone. It's actually one of the most common frustrations good club cricketers have. Because the strange thing about losing focus is that it rarely happens when you're struggling. It usually happens when you're batting well. You know, you've worked through the early part of the innings. You've adjusted to the pitch. You've started to trust your timing. And somewhere along the way, your mind drifts just enough for one mistake to appear. And that's the part that confuses and frustrates most batsmen. They assume losing focus means that they weren't concentrating hard enough. They assume it's a discipline problem. But that's not really what's happening at all. You know, I went through this exact same thing myself. There was a period where I would often get myself in, feeling comfortable, and then get out to a shot that didn't really reflect how well I'd actually been batting. Walking off the field, the feeling was always the same. Frustration. Not because I'd been beaten by a great ball, but because I knew the dismissal didn't really reflect the quality of the innings up to that point. And for a while, I couldn't quite explain it. I used to always think it was a technical issue. Maybe my footwork had been slightly, out. Maybe I should change my trigger movement. Maybe I hadn't judged the length properly. But when I started looking at it honestly, I realized the problem wasn't technical at all. It was something much simpler. My focus hadn't disappeared. It moved. And that's the part most batsmen don't realize. Focus rarely just switches off completely. Your mind is still active. It's still working. It's just working on the wrong things at the wrong time. Instead of being completely absorbed in the ball that's about to be delivered, your attention drifts somewhere else. Sometimes it drifts to the scoreboard. You start thinking about how many runs you've made. Sometimes it drifts to the bowler. You start thinking about, what he might try next to get me out. Sometimes it drifts to the previous ball. You replay the shot you just missed and wonder why you didn't smash it through the covers before. None of those thoughts seem dangerous at the time. They feel harmless. But every time your attention moves away from the present ball, your decision-making slows down slightly. And cricket is a game that punishes slow decisions. The difference between a cleanly played shot and a dismissal is often measured in fractions of a second. The brain needs to recognise length quickly, decide on the movement quickly, and commit to the shot completely. When your mind is partially somewhere else, even briefly, that process slows down. The movement becomes slightly hesitant, the decision becomes slightly late, and suddenly a ball that should have been handled comfortably becomes a problem. What made this clearer to me over time was noticing when my batting felt simple. The innings where everything seemed to flow had one thing in common. My attention was completely absorbed in the moment. Not the scoreboard, not the situation, just the ball. Everything felt calm. And that calmness wasn't because I had eliminated thoughts. It was because my attention had somewhere useful to go. That's the key distinction. The goal isn't to have an empty mind. That's just impossible. The real skill is directing your attention to the right place and bringing it back quickly when it drifts. That's a learned skill. The best batsmen don't stay perfectly focused every second of an innings. Their minds wander just like everyone else's. The difference is that they recognise it sooner and they reset. They bring their attention back to the present ball before the next decision needs to be made. Now, once I understood that, I started paying attention, or more attention, to the moments between deliveries. Those seconds between balls are where focus is either rebuilt or it's lost. If you stay mentally tangled up in the previous ball, your attention carries that baggage into the next one. And if you start thinking too far ahead, your mind leaves the present moment completely. But if you use those few seconds deliberately, you can reset your attention every time. One of the simplest habits I developed was stepping away, between deliveries, taking a breath, and bringing my focus back to the one thing that actually mattered, the next ball. Not the whole innings, not the last mistake, Just the next ball. I know it sounds simple, but it changes the rhythm of your thinking. Instead of trying to stay perfectly focused for an entire innings, which is unrealistic, you're just rebuilding your focus ball by ball. And when you do that, something interesting happens. The game starts to feel simpler again. Your decisions become clearer and your movements become more decisive. And those frustrating dismissals where you felt like you simply switched off start to happen much less often. Now, this idea sits right at the heart of what I explore in The Century Within, the new book that I've just released. Because many performance problems in cricket aren't about ability. They're about attention. They're about where your mind is during the moments that matter most. And once you understand how attention moves during an innings, you stop blaming yourself for losing focus and you start learning how to bring it back. And that's where consistency starts to grow. So if you've walked, off the field wondering why you lost concentration when you were batting well, don't assume it's because you lack discipline. More often than not, your attention simply drifted for a moment. The real skill in batting isn't staying perfectly focused for an entire innings. As I said, that's unrealistic. The real skill is recognizing when your attention has drifted and calmly bringing it back to the ball. Because when your attention stays there, decisions become clear and the game becomes simple again. And that's usually when players realize that the difference between an average innings and a really good one, often isn't technique at all. It's simply, where was your mind during those moments that matter the most? So the next time you walk out to bat, just notice where your attention is. Because very often the difference between getting out and building a big innings is simply where your mind was when that ball was delivered. So the link for The Century Within is down in the description. But until next week, bye for now.